right? So within these are smart cables. Within each of these panels, there are lots of chips, analog chips. That the one chip is called a marker that decides which is the right way that the thing is plugged in. So the way Apple is shipping their MacBook, there's only one of these connectors. Now you as the user, one is not enough for me, right? I need an HDMI connection, I need a VGA connection, I need the power, of course, and I need to convert to a USB 2.0 or 3.0 connection. So as a user, you have a demand saying, I can't live with the one connection. Why does Apple do that? They obviously want to make the device, the laptop much thinner. So that's a constraint. So why am I telling you all of this? There's an opportunity. So Professor Van der Spiegel, I borrowed this from him, right? He has 3 of these that he carries. All right, one's a VGA, one's HDMI, one's USB. So is there an opportunity here? Can anybody think of an opportunity? Come on, you can think of that. I can combine all 3 into one. So I only have to carry one. I don't know about you, but these converters, even my laptop, going from HDMI to VGA, when I go to my classrooms, invariably I'll lose maybe 1 or 2 a quarter. Now I got 3 of these carrying around in my briefcase. It's a pain in the neck. So as a user, I put in my demand saying, I want one of these, right? And not only do I want one, but maybe there's an opportunity that with all these chips that are going in here, maybe I can integrate the chip and the package to make this much smaller. Would you like that as a user? I would. So now if you were an entrepreneur, what you would say, okay, so this is a pain in the neck for the user. That's a customer problem. Do I have a solution? Is it a cost-effective solution? Let me validate that with customers. If customers say, yeah, if you have this that's half the size, I'm going to buy one. Then you're onto something. That's how you start your own company. You can also take that a step further. If you can now provide a solution to Apple, that they can have all of these things instead of having, today Apple probably has to have whatever circuit board supports that one port. They have to have 3 of them, and they don't have enough room. If you can now create a new one that in the same footprint, it supports 3 of those ports, maybe they'll do 3. There's another opportunity. You as the user, you as the designer, we just created a couple opportunities. Are they good or not? I don't know, but these are the, conceptually I think that's the way I would like to suggest doing this. In my class, we do the same thing. We start the class, we have the people form teams of 4 or 5 people, and they got to come up with the idea. On the first day of class, they got to tell me what their idea is. And we listen to them, and they document it. By the end of the 10 weeks, they have, as a team, to come up with a new idea. And then I meet with them 3 times during the quarter and coach them. Because I will ask them these questions. Who's the customer? What's the problem you're solving? Who's going to buy it? And then they have to go do some what I call customer discovery. They got to go talk to customers, ask them the right questions. And by the way, you never go ask a customer what do they want. The customer doesn't know. Most of the time. I mean, in this case, the customer might know, but most of the time, customer won't know. They just want. You've got to observe what the problem is that they're experiencing. Create a solution. And then put a product together. So these are more successful ways, these are tricks for success to create your new business. So how do I get into that? So I was talking about this as far as where and what kind of business would you put together. Now in this example I gave you, does it matter whether you're the best analog designer? Yeah, probably. What matters more is maybe the packaging piece of it. maybe the integration. So, should you be, if you want to go down that path, keep your mind open as to what technologies are out there for packaging that might allow you to create those solutions. You can't always do this in every field, so that's where the power of teams comes in. You may be the best analog designer, and if that solution requires analog design, partner with your buddy that's a good packaging person. And that might be a way to figure out who your partner should be to create the product that you're trying to create. All right, so long story here. I took a little detour. But fundamentally, to give you an idea of what the business looks like, this is the output of the semiconductors, of course, is chips. Here's an example of a Qualcomm Snapdragon chip. And then the electronics might be the navigation system that, in the automobile, there's on the dashboard, you got a navigation system that goes into the automobile. So that's kind of the hierarchy here. Materials, of course, there's a printed circuit board or the chemicals that go into building those devices. And so that's kind of the overall picture. I don't know if you've seen this before, but that's a good set of examples. Okay, Moore's Law. No talk is complete without a Moore's Law, right? So just to give you an idea, this is a plot of the number of transistors per chip in the blue, and pink is the technology node over the years. And I used to track this very closely because it was very critical to my career. I started my career in 1974, so it was just the beginning of the Moore's Law. And as I told you, I was a process engineer initially, so we were every 3 years getting a new technology. Every 3 years, like clockwork. This, of course, is a plot of Intel processors. This is the 4004, and every 3 years they would introduce a new technology. Moore's Law, fundamentally, when he wrote that paper in 1965, said that the transistor count was going to double every 12 months. Later on, he modified that to be doubling every 18 months. And I can vouch for the fact that up until through the 90s, Intel was very, very good at introducing new technologies every 3 years. Why do I know that? Because in 1980, we had our own wafer fab at Burroughs Corporation. And in 1980, our management decided that it was too expensive to have our own wafer fab. Not wafer fab at that time. It was more the process development piece was so expensive. It was not the core competency for Burroughs. Burroughs was the second largest computer company, and they said they wanted to partner with Intel to get the Intel technology installed in our wafer fabrication facility. So my responsibility as R&D was to take the Intel technology and install it back at our factory. The good news is I got to know Intel people very well, and their technologies very well. The bad news is that a lot of my people left. Said, you're going to get somebody else's technology? We want to do new technology, we're going to leave. But let me tell you, that was one of the most challenging jobs I've had. Why is that? Because we had to take somebody else's technology. Intel was developing technologies on newer pieces of equipment. We had to take that technology and reproduce it on older pieces of technology. Very, very challenging jobs. And the value that we brought to Unisys at that time, or Burroughs, was that in 1985, October 1985, I still remember that, Intel just announced their 8386 processor on the 1.5 micron technology, 1500 nanometers, right? We introduced a Unisys product at the same time, a prototype, when Intel announced that. So that was the whole value add that our management had decided was important to us. So again, great career development for me, but that's what happened here so this is the number of transistor counts over the years. This was the 1.5 micron technology I'm talking about there. And, kind of 2007, 2010, people kind of stopped drawing this chart very much because of all the doom and gloom, and also it was, for many reasons, right? It was more difficult to track the individual chip transistor counts because people then started to have multi-processors, quad processors, dual processors, quad processors, all that kind of stuff. And I've read that today there's 20 billion transistors per chip on the 16 to 14 nanometer node. One thing I did learn, by the way, over the years is never to say never for this industry. And I give you some examples. In 1990, what was the node here? It was about 0.8 micron technology. And that was called submicron, right? Less than a micron node. And people said, well, you can't do less than a micron. You can't resolve that resolution on the wafer. Well, Intel made 0.8 micron. And then people said, well, half micron is the limit. It's going to be nothing less than half micron. And then they did a half micron, and then they did 0.35, and then that was going to be deep submicron, and that was the end of the world. If you look at the history, there's a classic paper by Tak Ning that talks about the red brick wall. And by the way, in the 1990s, I don't know if Core is going to get into that, but that led to the formation of the ITRS, is International Technology Roadmap for Semiconductors. That became the driver force for the industry to figure out where the limits are in each of the components of the technology, and then had the solutions come up as an industry consortium. That was really good. I think that it's still continuing at this time. So the industry really has a way of finding the technical solutions. Why? Because technical people are really good at what they do. That's not the problem. We'll get into what the problem is a little later. So what drove the industry is mainframes originally. I think Professor Van der Spiegel showed you that. The ELIAC in University of Pennsylvania that got converted to a single chip device in his group. Microprocessors, the personal computer, the internet, the cellular, and of course, as we'll talk about now, the IoT and other applications. It used to be, in the old days, that if you were a mainframe company like an IBM, you saw the value of semiconductor technology, and you had to have your own wafer fab to do that. So these companies became known as what we'll call integrated device manufacturers. We'll talk some more about it later. IBM, Hitachi, Sony, Philips, Unisys. Then in the 50s, there was semiconductor companies like Fairchild was formed, Texas Instruments, Motorola, National, Intel, Toshiba, and others. In the early 90s, there were a lot of people with a lot of ideas, but they didn't have their own wafer fab. So the whole theme of the fabless semiconductors was formed in that time frame, where some wafer fabs that were not completely full would take a design from somebody that was able to do the design on their technology, and they shipped the product. So that was the beginning of it. And then in 1987, Taiwan opened up the Taiwan Semiconductor, and UMC were formed. And they sort of became the drivers for the outsourcing of silicon wafer fabrication. And that then led to the formalization of the Fabless Semiconductor Association and fabless companies. I think Qualcomm was founded in 1984. They didn't start shipping chips in quantities until the early 90s. My own company knew what it took to be successful in the fabless company because of our experiences. And so we created a business that helped people integrate that whole back-end infrastructure. And we did that for many years, up until the 2007, 2008 timeframe. So we'll talk a little more about fabless companies a little later. I noticed my watch, it's 12 o'clock. Who's, time are we supposed to break for lunch? Alvin? Where's Alvin? Not there. Okay, we'll keep going until somebody interrupts us. You getting hungry? Nobody's asking any questions, so. Okay, let's go a few more. So fundamentally, what drove this whole, you can ask the question, why did people keep going up that Moore's Law curve? The big drivers was cost reduction, and we'll talk more about this, power reduction. You get the smaller size and form factor as the chip complexity went up, and of course performance went up. So there was lots of instances. I'll give you an example. The IBM PC that was introduced in 1980 time frame had a motherboard that was about 12 inches on a side, or maybe even bigger than that, and had lots and lots of components, hundreds of components on it, integrated circuits. So some of the fabless industry that started, what they wanted, they looked at that board and said, oh, I can take this group of 10, 15, 20 chips and put them into a single chip. And once you did that, you could reduce the footprint of the motherboard and you could get better performance. It was an excellent market because you knew exactly what, let's say it was 100 chips that you're putting into one, you knew what the cost of those 100 chips was, what the performance was, what the test vectors were, and you could replace a new chip, those 100 with a new chip that duplicated the functionality, duplicated the test vectors. You knew what the cost target was, and if you could sell them for 30% less, the IBM and other customers were just really happy. That's sort of the overall theme of the semiconductor industry. It just happened over and over and over again, okay? Many, many, many times. Is it about time to break?
Yeah, it's for 12. Yes, it's now.
Now? Okay. All right, so fundamentally, what I've done so far is to walk you through a little bit of the background of the industry, and we'll get into a little more detail about how to look at the cost factors, what drove the industry, and then we'll get into some of the career opportunities and the entrepreneurship stuff later on. So enjoy your lunch. Feel free to come up and ask questions. Okay? I think we'll announce at the, I think we're getting back at 1:30, right?
Yes, 1:30.
1:30.
Okay.
Okay?
Is that the end of for the morning?
Yeah. So this will be the end of the morning, and please have lunch, and then come back here at 1:30. Okay? Thank you.